The first bell of the morning echoed through the marble corridors of St. Havelock's Academy, a sharp contrast to the soft shuffle of Mia's worn shoes on the polished floors. Her uniform, faded at the seams, carried the faint scent of home washing powder, a subtle reminder that she came from somewhere outside this world of pristine blazers and perfectly polished hair. Her backpack sagged heavily on her shoulders, patched in places with mismatched fabric that told stories no one here cared to hear. From a distance, groups of girls clustered near the lockers, their whispers like tiny arrows aimed at her. "Where did she get those shoes?" one murmured, smirking at the scuffed tips of Mia's sneakers. Another tilted her head, eyes sharp and judging. "Do you even belong here?" The words were not loud, but they cut through the air like winter frost, leaving a chill on her skin. Mia kept her gaze lowered, the notebook she clutched pressed against her chest, pages curled and worn. Her heart thumped not with fear, but with quiet defiance she didn't yet fully understand. "They don't know me. They can't see me yet," she thought. Her fingers brushed the torn edges of the paper, tracing the letters she had carefully written the night before. An idea, a reflection, a small piece of her voice in a world that demanded silence from the like of her. A teacher called the students toward the auditorium, and Mia hesitated just a fraction too long, sensing the eyes following her every step. One girl nudged her shoulder with a sly grin, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her that she was visible in the way she was not meant to be. Mia swallowed, steadying herself. "I'll just keep walking. Keep my head up. Keep my dignity," she promised as the crowd surged forward, leaving behind a whispering trail that seemed to linger on her back. Inside the hall, the polished wooden floors gleamed under the sunlight streaming through tall windows. The chatter of students formed a low hum, punctuated by occasional laughter at someone else's expense. Mia found a corner at the back, her knees tucked close, a quiet island amid the sea of polished shoes and confident postures. She opened her notebook, not to hide, but to anchor herself, a small act of resilience in a place designed to measure worth by appearances. And yet beneath the tentative movements and the careful avoidance of harsh glances, a subtle strength shimmered. She observed, not just the girls laughing or the boys tossing papers, but the small injustices, the casual cruelties, the moments that everyone else accepted as normal. Her eyes, calm and calculating, cataloged the world in ways that were invisible to those who thought themselves superior. As the principal stepped onto the stage, Mia closed her notebook and exhaled, a whisper of determination passing her lips. "They don't define me." The murmur of the crowd, the echoes of judgment, became background noise, inconsequential to the quiet storm building within her. Somewhere deep down, she knew that this place, these people, would soon see the truth, that power, grace, and strength are not always loud, and dignity often comes wrapped in silence. And with that thought, Mia straightened her back, her eyes meeting the stage with an unwavering focus. The story of the quiet one was only beginning. The bell rang again, signaling the start of first-period literature, and Mia slid quietly into her seat at the far edge of the classroom. Her notebook lay open, a neatly penciled entry visible to anyone who cared to look. But the room was already buzzing, not with discussion of the day's lesson, but with whispered assessments of her presence. From the row ahead, a girl nudged her friend, tilting her head toward Mia's desk. "Look at that lunch," she snickered, lifting a plastic container filled with neatly packed leftovers, the lid slightly askew. "Who eats that?" The words carried laughter, a small, sharp explosion aimed directly at Mia's sense of belonging. The boy next to them smirked, pretending to focus on his notes, but glancing over often enough to reinforce the unspoken hierarchy. She did not belong. Mia lowered her gaze, hands folding over the edge of her desk, her movements slow and deliberate. She felt a familiar prickling of heat along her neck, not anger, not fear, but awareness. She had learned long ago that silence was armor, that measured patience often revealed more than a heated retort. Let them laugh. Let them speak, she reminded herself. It changes nothing. When the teacher called for volunteers to read their responses aloud, Mia raised her hand tentatively. The class seemed to notice for the first time, and a wave of muffled snickers met her effort. Her handwriting, careful and precise, was examined with the scrutiny of judgmental eyes. "Did she spell that wrong?" one whispered. "It looks weird," another added, tone dripping with derision. She felt the sting, a tiny contraction of pride threatened, but she folded it back into herself like a carefully folded letter. Her mind was calm, cataloging each glance, each smirk without the rush of retaliation. They are small and I am not, she thought. They mistake volume for strength. When it was her turn to answer, she spoke softly, each word chosen with precision. Her voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had seen enough to know that integrity was louder than mockery. The classroom, momentarily startled by the clarity of her phrasing, returned quickly to murmurs and stifled laughter. Mia, unshaken, returned her attention to the lesson, her hands steady as she traced words across the page, her heart anchored in the calm center of her own dignity. Even as the laughter ebbed into whispers, she noticed the small details the others overlooked. The way the sunlight caught the edge of a page, the slight tremor of a classmate's hand as they copied notes, the faint rustle of the teacher's pen marking the day's assignments. In these observations, she found power, perspective, and patience. She learned more from the quiet than they ever could from the noise. By the time the bells signaled the end of class, Mia had not only survived the scrutiny but had grown in it. Each smirk, each dismissive glance, each whispered insult had been catalogued, absorbed, and transmuted into quiet resolve. She walked to her next class with a slow, deliberate grace, aware of her presence, unbowed by their judgment, carrying a silent promise. One day, the world would notice her not for what she lacked, but for what she had quietly mastered. As Mia walked the quiet corridor between classes, the chatter of students faded into a background hum, distant and unimportant. Her shoes scuffed against the linoleum, a soft percussion accompanying her measured steps. But behind the modest uniform and the careful restraint, another life pulsed quietly, invisible to those around her. Flashbacks drifted through her mind like fragments of a half-forgotten dream. A grand chandelier swayed in the foyer of a home that seemed to have been plucked from a magazine, the walls adorned with oil paintings, floors polished to a mirror shine. Her fingers had brushed the smooth surface of crystal glasses, her small hands tracing the gold trim of heirloom dinnerware. Expensive gifts, designer shoes, gleaming electronics, delicate jewelry, had been offered to her at birthdays, holidays, even random afternoons, yet she had left them untouched, preferring the simplicity of her worn sneakers and scuffed notebooks. They see a uniform, not a person, she thought, her inner voice calm, reflective, almost amused. Around her, the students measured worth by appearances, by brands and polish, while she moved like a ghost among them, cataloging their actions, their small cruelties, their fleeting triumphs, without ever revealing the full spectrum of who she was. A lunch table in the courtyard flickered into focus, a girl offering a disdainful glance at Mia's modest meal, and the contrast was almost ironic in its clarity. In one world, she navigated marble halls and whispered judgments. In another, she had boardrooms where her family's decisions shaped markets, charities where her name carried weight, and private corridors where her voice could command attention without effort. Yet she remained here, deliberately unseen, letting the whispers and smirks play out around her, absorbing them, learning from them, sharpening herself in silence. She remembered conversations with her parents, their voices warm but firm. Power is not what is shown. Power is what is managed, what is chosen, they had told her. And Mia had chosen. She had chosen subtlety over spectacle, patience over arrogance, the quiet observation of the world over the spectacle of being noticed. Each step she took in these hallways, each pencil mark in her notebook, was part of a practice, small, invisible, yet deliberate. And yet a spark of something more lingered beneath her measured calm. The day would come when the balance would shift, when the eyes that dismissed her would see not the uniform, not the shoes, not the laughable lunch, but the person beneath it all. A force tempered by patience, a mind honed by observation, a courage cultivated in silence. Mia exhaled, letting the flashback dissolve, and adjusted her backpack. The next class awaited, the same whispers and dismissals looming ahead, but she moved forward with a quiet promise to herself. That invisibility was not weakness, it was preparation. The corridors of St. Havelock seemed to hum with a hidden current, one that Mia felt as she walked from class to class. Groups had begun to cluster with a precision that felt orchestrated, whispers traveling like smoke from one corner of the hall to another. Every glance she caught was measured, every laugh slightly too sharp, every cough a reminder of her perceived place in the hierarchy. A shadow fell across her desk as she opened her notebook in history class. Two girls leaned in, whispering, their words dripping with mockery. "Did you see her shoes today?" one hissed. "Still the same ugly ones." The other nodded, smirking, then glanced at a third who shook her head, as if confirming a judgment everyone silently agreed upon. Labels hung in the air, poor, strange, invisible. Mia did not flinch. Her hands moved with calm precision over her notebook, pen scratching in neat, deliberate strokes. She had learned early that these currents of gossip were as much performance as they were malice, waves that passed, leaving only the keen observer intact. Let them speak, she thought. Let them carve their own small world with empty words. The narrator's voice, low and measured, seemed to hover just above the scene. In the theater of adolescence, cruelty is currency, and the quiet ones are the most visible targets. And yet within Mia, no fear stirred. There was awareness, yes, a careful cataloging of alliances and fissures, of the way the whispers shifted when the teacher's back was turned, but no panic. She understood the hierarchy, saw the fragility beneath the laughter, and noted every detail. Even the physical world seemed complicit in the social tension. Shadows lengthened along lockers, bending around clusters of laughing students. A stray beam of sunlight caught a scuffed shoe, a tilted backpack, and illuminated the difference between perception and reality. Side glances darted toward her like small knives, and yet she walked on, her composure absolute, her gaze calm, as if each whisper only sharpened her sense of purpose. At lunch, the murmur of gossip spilled across tables. Mia sat alone at the edge of the courtyard, notebook open, pencil in hand, tracing small designs absent-mindedly. Behind her, groups tilted their heads, murmuring judgments, unaware that she observed not just them, but the subtle betrayals, the quiet fears, the cracks in their facade. They see what they want to see, she thought. They do not see me. By the day's end, the whisper campaign had swelled into a tide, relentless but hollow. Mia had been cataloging, learning, and storing every glance, every word, every subtle shove like tiny pieces of a puzzle. One day, she knew, those pieces would fit together in a way that none of them could anticipate. For now, she remained calm, unbroken, the silent center in a storm of idle cruelty. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the classroom, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. Mia sat at the back, notebook open, pen poised but untouched, as she observed the subtle choreography of exclusion, the quiet laughter, the deliberate leaning away, the whispered judgments that had followed her all week. A soft tap on her desk broke the rhythm. She looked up to see Leela, one of the quieter students from the front row, holding out a notebook with a gentle smile. "Here," Leela said, her voice calm, steady, almost imperceptible over the low hum of the room. "You can borrow mine for today. It has the notes from yesterday's lesson." Mia blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She had learned to expect whispers and side glances, not quiet gestures of support. Her fingers brushed the edge of Leela's notebook, a small warmth rising in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet imbued with genuine gratitude. Leela didn't linger. She returned to her seat, and for the rest of class, Mia traced the neat handwriting on the pages, comparing notes, absorbing both the lesson and the subtle message embedded in the gesture. She was seen, even if just by one person. A quiet kindness doesn't demand recognition, Mia thought, but it changes everything for the one who receives it. Later, during a group activity, Leela subtly included Mia, leaning in so that her voice could reach across the small circle. "What do you think, Mia?" she asked, inviting, patient, without drawing attention from others. Mia offered her answer, measured and thoughtful, her words calm but precise. No laughter followed, no snide comments, just a fleeting acknowledgement that she, too, belonged, if only for a moment. As the bell rang and the students shuffled to the next class, Mia closed her notebook, feeling a quiet stir of connection, a small but persistent flame in the midst of ongoing exclusion. She had not needed Leela to fix anything. She had no illusions of rescue. but the gesture, simple and unassuming, reminded her of her own capacity for grace, patience, and observation. One day, she thought, the balance will shift, and kindness and dignity will matter more than whispers and cruelty. Mia adjusted her backpack and stepped into the hallway with the same measured composure, carrying not just her notebook but a quiet promise that she would remember who had offered light in the midst of shadows, and she would repay it in ways far beyond the imagination of her peers. The elevator doors opened to a quiet hum, revealing a space that contrasted sharply with the halls of St. Havelock's. Mia stepped into the apartment she had always known as home, where polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of recessed lighting, and expansive windows framed the city in muted golds of sunset. The scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air, delicate and unobtrusive, a reminder that luxury could be quiet, elegant, and intentional. She hung her uniform and backpack carefully, noting the subtle crease lines in her sleeve and the faint scuff marks on her shoes. A life of opulence lay beyond these walls, yet she carried herself as if none of it mattered, because it was by choice. Wealth had never been her identity. Discipline, observation, and humility were the lessons she wore like armor. Her mother appeared from the kitchen, soft footsteps on the marble. "How was your day, Mia?" she asked, voice calm but knowing, as though she could read the subtle tensions that clung to her daughter like invisible dust. "Fine," Mia replied simply, though her mind still replayed the whispers, the side glances, the small cruelties. Her father joined them, offering a quiet nod. "Remember," he said, settling into the living room chair, "the world often judges on appearances. What matters is what you carry inside. Wealth, status, they are tools, not definitions. Empathy, grace, discipline, these are strength." Mia absorbed the words, letting them settle alongside her own observations. She wandered to the living room, noting the understated elegance. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, art displayed without ostentation, light filtering through sheer curtains onto a soft rug. Nothing screamed of privilege, yet everything whispered it in the way only those who understood subtlety could perceive. "I know it's not easy," her mother continued, "to be treated unfairly, to be misunderstood. But the silence you choose, the dignity you maintain, it shapes you far more than their judgments ever could." Mia nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "It's not about showing who I am. It's about living it," she thought. The lessons of humility were not imposed. They were deliberate, cultivated, and practiced in both public and private spheres. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to shimmer. The world outside was unaware of the contrast, of the quiet discipline behind her calm composure. Yet this knowledge, carried silently, gave her a steadiness that no whisper, no snicker, no cruel label could touch. Mia had learned the weight of perception, and how to carry it without losing herself. The classroom buzzed with a low hum of anticipation, desks arranged into clusters for the group project. Mia sat at the center of one table, her notebook open, pen poised. The assignment demanded leadership and collaboration, but as soon as she suggested a direction, the room shifted, subtly at first, then more overtly. "She wouldn't understand," whispered one girl, just loud enough for the nearest to hear, a smirk curling the corner of her lips. A boy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, shaking his head. "Why do we even bother with her?" he added, voice dripping with condescension. Mia felt the familiar surge of awareness, cataloging the words, the angles of their bodies, the half-smiles and eye rolls. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers intertwined, betraying nothing. She had learned the art of stillness, the patience of observation, but the tension in the room was palpable, pressing in from all sides. "Let's at least hear her idea," Leela interjected quietly, her voice firm without demanding attention. Mia appreciated the gesture but did not rely on it. She took a slow breath and spoke, her tone calm, measured, each word deliberate. "If we approach it this way, we can integrate all perspectives efficiently and ensure our arguments are cohesive." A laugh rippled through the group, sharp and mocking. "Cohesive? She's just reading from her notebook," one student whispered, leaning over another's shoulder for confirmation. Others nodded, a small chorus of doubt meant to isolate her, to undermine not just her ideas but her presence. Mia's eyes met theirs steadily, subtle but unyielding. She noted the tension in their shoulders, the tightness in clenched fists, the nervous darting of eyes when she refused to flinch. They measure power by volume. They mistake agitation for control, she thought, inner voice calm, almost amused. I am neither loud nor reckless. That is my strength. Minutes stretched, the project's progress stalling under the weight of derision. Mia maintained her composure, redirecting focus with concise suggestions, calmly addressing errors in logic, inviting Leela and a few neutral classmates to contribute. Every small success she achieved was a quiet rebellion against the undercurrent of cruelty. By the end of the session, frustration simmered visibly among the detractors, yet Mia's group had completed the framework for the assignment. Her shoulders relaxed imperceptibly, and a faint smile brushed her lips, not of triumph, but of quiet confidence, the awareness that the storm she endured could be weathered. That patience and poise carried a weight far heavier than mockery ever could. The bell rang, slicing through the tension. Mia gathered her notebook, standing with deliberate grace, aware that the day's trials were far from over, but certain that she had already begun turning the tide, quietly, imperceptibly, toward her own reckoning. The auditorium hummed with anticipation, banners fluttering, chairs neatly arranged, a polished stage awaiting the opening act. Students chatted in clusters, the previous week's whispers still lingering in the corners, a low undercurrent of judgment that seemed almost permanent. Yet today, the air carried a different note, an unfamiliar tension, subtle but unmistakable, as a quiet excitement buzzed at the edges of awareness. Mia entered through the side doors, unnoticed at first, her steps measured, her posture perfect in its calm elegance. She wore no extravagant gown, no overt display of wealth, only a simple, well-tailored ensemble that reflected quiet confidence rather than ostentation. But the room seemed to sense something had shifted. Eyes darted toward her, murmurs halting mid-phrase, shoulders stiffening. "Isn't that?" whispered one of the girls who had mocked her last week, voice trembling as she struggled to put disbelief into words. Mia's gaze swept the room slowly, deliberately, taking in the faces that had once laughed, excluded, and judged. She smiled faintly, a curve of grace rather than triumph, and stepped onto the stage. "Good afternoon," she began, voice soft but commanding enough to reach every corner of the auditorium. "I'm pleased to announce that this year's cultural festival is sponsored by my family." A stunned silence followed, stretching long enough for the echo of irony to settle over the crowd. Those who had whispered about her lunch, mocked her handwriting, and dismissed her presence now stood frozen, shadows of judgment eclipsed by the unassailable truth of her identity. One of her former detractors, cheeks flushed, stammered, "But you're rich." The words fell flat, incomplete, inadequate against the calm certainty Mia radiated. "Yes," she replied evenly, eyes sweeping the room once more. "But my presence here was never about wealth or labels or what I wear. It's about ideas, contributions, and the respect we show one another. True power is measured by character, not appearance." Leela, seated quietly in the audience, offered a small, approving smile, the only one unburdened by astonishment. Mia's gaze briefly met hers, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding, of quiet integrity recognized. Cameras clicked, phones rose, and whispers of shock transformed into murmurs of admiration. Students who had mocked her bent forward, not in arrogance but in belated respect, some even murmuring apologies under their breath. Mia accepted the acknowledgement with grace, uncluttered by anger or vindictiveness. Every step she had taken, the patience, the resilience, the quiet observation, culminated here, visible yet unassuming, undeniable in its power. She turned to the podium, ready to address the event itself. The spotlight illuminated her, not as the poor, strange, invisible girl they had dismissed, but as a young woman of insight, poise, and quiet authority. And in that moment, the narrative shifted. The auditorium, once a stage for whispers and cruelty, now bore witness to the subtle, profound justice of her presence. strength tempered by grace, humility refined by experience, and dignity that required no applause. Mia exhaled softly, the corners of her lips lifting in calm satisfaction. The world had finally seen her, not as they imagined, but as she truly was. The days following the festival were quiet, but charged with an unspoken shift. The corridors of St. Havelock's no longer hummed with ridicule aimed at Mia. Instead, they carried a cautious awareness, a new gravity in the glances cast her way. She moved among her peers with the same deliberate composure, but now there was a subtle change, respect, quietly earned, trailing each measured step. In literature class, a group project required meticulous research. One of the girls who had mocked her handwriting stumbled, frustration evident in her furrowed brow. Mia approached, her pace unhurried. "Here I can help outline the key points," she said softly, gesturing toward the notes she had already organized. "We can integrate your ideas as well. It'll make the argument stronger." The girl hesitated, caught off guard by the absence of ridicule, but eventually nodded. "Thanks," she murmured, almost ashamed, eyes avoiding hers. Power wielded softly, the narrator observed, is louder than ridicule ever was. Mia did not need to gloat or retaliate. The quiet integrity of her actions spoke for itself. The students who had once whispered and laughed now watched, some stiffly, some reluctantly, as her influence unfolded, not through dominance, but through competence, patience, and understated guidance. During group presentations, Mia's leadership was evident, but never ostentatious. She encouraged contributions from every student, highlighting ideas, correcting mistakes gently, and maintaining a calm authority that drew attention without demanding it. Even those who had dismissed her were compelled to follow her direction, to acknowledge her insight, and to absorb the lesson of humility without a single harsh word from her. Later, as she packed her notebook, one of the boys who had mocked her earlier approached, eyes hesitant. I didn't realize," he began. Mia looked up, meeting his gaze with steady calm. She inclined her head slightly, a small, patient smile forming. "Understanding takes time. The important part is that you're willing to try now." No applause followed, only the quiet acknowledgement of her composure, the moral weight of her restraint settling on the shoulders of those who had sought to diminish her. She left the classroom without a backward glance, her dignity intact, her quiet strength radiating in ways no sarcasm or ridicule could touch. By the end of the week, whispers of mockery had faded entirely, replaced by subtle deference and genuine respect. Mia had taught more than lessons from a notebook. She had shown that grace under pressure, humility in the face of cruelty, and deliberate kindness could enact justice far more profoundly than anger or revenge ever could. In the halls of St. Havelock's, the quiet one was no longer invisible. She was undeniable, not because she demanded attention, but because she embodied the power of patience, the resonance of dignity, and the profound impact of unspoken strength. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of St. Havelock's, casting long, soft shadows along the polished floors. Mia walked slowly through the hallways, her steps measured, almost meditative. Around her, students moved with a newfound awareness, some offering quiet smiles, lingering glances of understanding that had been impossible weeks before. The whispers had vanished, replaced by an unspoken acknowledgement of who she was, not the caricature they had imagined, but the person she had always been. They saw me as less, Mia reflected, yet I carry the world in my silence. Her thoughts drifted naturally to the lessons she had learned along the way. Patience is a form of strength, dignity often requires restraint, and empathy is a currency more powerful than status or wealth. The corridors that had once felt oppressive now seemed like the stage of a carefully rehearsed dance, where every glance, every gesture had contributed to the shaping of understanding. Her notebook, worn and familiar, rested beneath her arm. Inside, it held sketches, notes, reflections, proof that even the quietest voices could resonate. She thought of Leela's small gestures, the moments of kindness that had anchored her in stormy seas of judgment. She thought of the classmates who had mocked her, now quietly humbled, and recognized that their cruelty was never about her. It was a reflection of fear, envy, and misunderstanding. Mia paused at a window, gazing out at the city lights beginning to twinkle against the early evening sky. Strength is not in proving others wrong, she mused. It is in living authentically, in carrying grace through the judgments of the world, and in giving space for others to learn from their mistakes. She felt a gentle satisfaction, not of revenge, but of quiet justice, the kind that leaves no scars, only awareness. Her parents' lessons echoed in her mind: humility, discretion, and the quiet cultivation of power. Yet now she understood them more deeply, the balance of visibility and invisibility, of patience and assertion. Her identity, once hidden, now walked alongside her reputation, not as armor, but as a natural extension of her choices. As she continued down the hallway, she noticed small gestures. A hand offered to pick up a dropped notebook, a nod of acknowledgement, a fleeting smile that lingered just long enough to convey understanding. The world, she realized, was measured not by cruelty or mockery, but by how one carried oneself through it. Mia exhaled softly, letting the warmth of comprehension settle around her. Her journey was far from over, but the lessons were clear. Empathy is earned, resilience is practiced, and human judgment, while inevitable, can be met with grace rather than retaliation. She walked on, silent but unshakable, carrying the quiet power of her experiences, and the promise of a life defined not by what others thought of her, but by what she knew of herself. The hallways of St. Havelock's buzzed faintly with the usual chatter, but now there was a careful hesitation in the air. Students who had once whispered and laughed found themselves glancing toward Mia, offering tentative smiles and awkward nods. Some tried to strike conversations, their voices overly polite, eyes betraying a mix of guilt and curiosity. Mia walked past them with deliberate calm, each step measured, her posture relaxed yet unmistakably confident. She acknowledged none of the gestures with more than a fleeting glance, her gaze serene, almost amused. They think reconciliation is a transaction, she thought, but influence is never owed. It is earned, and sometimes quietly withheld. A girl from her old group approached, notebook clutched nervously. "Mia, I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she stammered. Mia offered a gentle, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," she said softly, her tone warm but controlled. "Learn from the past and move forward." The narrator's voice lingered as Mia continued down the sunlit corridor. True wealth is never just money. It is the grace to rise above what others think, the wisdom to reveal only what serves understanding, and the strength to let silence speak louder than words. As the students watched her pass, a subtle irony hung in the air. The quiet one they had underestimated had become their measure of composure, patience, and dignity. Proof that real power is never loud, never flashy, but always lasting. Weeks had passed since the festival, yet the echoes of Mia's presence lingered throughout St. Havelock's. The whispers of judgment that once trailed her had been replaced by subtle, conscious changes. Students who had laughed at her lunch now shared notes without prompting. Those who had mocked her handwriting paused to offer encouragement. The corridors carried a softer rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement that kindness and respect were not optional. They were learned. Mia moved among them with the same measured composure, her steps light but purposeful. She noticed the small gestures, a chair held open for another, a notebook returned with care, a smile lingering just a moment longer than before. Some lessons are loud, some are quiet, the narrator reflected. Mia taught both. She sat under the sunlight streaming through the library windows, notebook in hand, observing a group of classmates discussing a project with collaboration replacing competition. Leela smiled at her from across the table, a shared glance of understanding passing between them. The admiration she received was no longer tethered to wealth or spectacle. It was rooted in something far more enduring: wisdom, patience, and integrity. Mia's influence had reshaped the invisible currents of the school, but she remained grounded, unaffected by praise or recognition. She had learned the art of quiet power, of subtle guidance, and of leading by example rather than assertion. As the day ended and students filed out, she stood at the doorway, watching the sunlight fall across polished floors. Her reflection in the window was calm, poised, and unassuming. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, but in her quiet way, she had changed the world around her. And in that moment, it was clear. The girl they misjudged had become the measure of dignity, the quiet benchmark of empathy, and the embodiment of a lesson that would linger long after the corridors fell silent.